Hi guys, something smells. Something is definitely stinking up the joint, festering up the area, and here it is. This is Carnival of Chaos, right? It's a Nurgle follower essentially, traveling around Mordheim, bringing death and disease and pestilence to many a settlement in the Warhammer world. And these are one of the few times I think that I can think of where Nurgle or the blatant the blatant spread of chaos has taken a direct turn, because usually chaos kind of has a little bit more of an insidious effect on the Warhammer world until they take to the field in open battle. But by then, you know that the end times are upon you. But so this model was part of a warband, an expansion warband for the original Mordheim game. And what we have here is what happens when Nurgle followers take to stagecoaches and colorful carnivals, and they sort of move from town to town, spreading the word of Papa Nurgle. And it's quite a rare thing that you actually see chaos forces like at large within the empire moving from city to city. But then again, this was during the time of Mordheim, so you've got in the year 1999 in Warhammer terms, as well as in real life, you really had the sense of the Warhammer world potentially coming to an end because your comet has come down and landed right on the city of Mordheim, destroyed it, and scattered warpstone chunks everywhere. So, in a sense, you could say that the power of the Chaos Gods are in full wax. It's in full swing. It's kind of definitely on the rise, and you've got Chaos worshippers and agents of the foul for Chaos Gods in full swing, running around across the empire, spreading their special blend of horridness. And the Carnival of Chaos is just a really good example of this. In this case, for the followers of Nurgle. So, Nurgle, of course, is the god of disease, despair, plagues, and general unhappiness, depression, so to speak. And his one claim to fame is that he tends to bring succor to those who are suffering from a disease, who are kind of down on their luck, the downtrodden, the miserable, the afflicted. And in times like these, what Nurgle offers is a sense of relief, respite, a kind of ability to look past the discomfort and pain, and to move on to becoming elated and happy and delirious. And you can sort of see how that is fertile ground when the land is suffering. You can see how the empire is full of cases like this in the event of something like the great comet landing in Mordheim. And you've got pilgrims and cycles and all manner of death, decay, disease, destruction, pure chaos really, inflicted upon the Warhammer world. So Carnivals of Chaos travel from city to city, village to village, and they spread mirth and joy at a time when the Warhammer world really needs to be closing ranks and uniting to fight chaos. And what they do is they kind of get the inhabitants of your various villages into a bit of a frenzy. They get all excited, and then at the stroke of midnight, they commence what is called the Dance of Death, which is the point at which all hell breaks loose, and the facade of the demon, the heretic, and the you know Nurgle worshipper essentially falls away, and the full force of chaos is inflicted onto the inhabitants of that hapless city, who then start to mutate into vessels of Nurgle's rot. And then that goes on to spread from city to city, and then the carnival packs up and goes on to the next town to spread its wretched message of twisted salvation. So it's a kind of cool concept. It's a little bit almost realm of chaos like, insofar as you've got something that's a very supernatural phenomenon happening in the Warhammer world. Remember that at this point, most of the time, the Warhammer world is a place of relative superstition and but calm nonetheless. So it's a little bit surprising to see Agents of Chaos at operating at large within the Warhammer world. And generally speaking, many people within the Warhammer world don't actually know, or at least the Empire, I suppose. The idea of chaos is kind of a hushed secret, spoken in hushed tones, and not really an open secret amongst people. So just the idea that chaos might be operating so blatantly under the sun, so to speak, in the broad daylight, is kind of a new concept, and it's interesting in its own ways. If anything, it really shows that escalation of the end times and how bad things have gotten if chaos cults are openly moving from place to place in the Warhammer world. So yeah, really cool concept. As far as a warband is concerned, you've got everything from plague bearers to these. This is a strongman brute, right? It really fulfills that circus strongman kind of vibe. And as you can see, he is quite a foe to be reckoned with on the Mordheim tabletop. He's huge. He's got this giant flail, making him even stronger. And he is a real problem for anyone trying to hold on to their sanity, hold from being turned into a carrier of Nurgle's plagues in their own right. And yeah, pretty scary prospect to face in the game, on the battlefield directly, in combat, as well as because all opponents that get into hand-to-hand combat with somebody with Nurgle's Rod essentially has a chance of falling victim to the plague and turning into a carrier of the disease. And that's a really scary thought, because it can spread from warband member to warband member, and eventually the entire warband might become afflicted by Nurgle's Rod, turning them de facto into carriers of the Rod. And of course, if they were going to go on to face other warbands in battle, there is even more chance of that spreading as well. So pretty terrifying stuff, and I think they really added something that Mordheim kind of needed at that stage. Bear in mind that at this stage, the original 6 core warbands were already out and were being enjoyed by various players. So the addition of an apocalyptic sort of end boss level threat in the form of this very, very powerful warband was really a nice way to escalate the stakes, to make everyone shudder in their boots when you face them. And it was a really good way to add an additional layer of intrigue and stakes to any fight that Mordheim players in your campaign would be facing. So that was kind of cool. So what are we going to do with his pants? So in the lore, Carnival of Chaos models are described as being attired in motley, and since that sort of circus big top stripes would be a big part of any carnival or circus kind of look, I thought I would do that here. So let me show you how I typically do my stripy sort of pants. So whether you're painting a Blood Bowl referee, or you're doing a sort of retro looking Necromunda Goliath gang who used to wear striped pants quite a bit, actually. Kind of cool. So yeah, let me show you how I like to do this. So first, you want to isolate that part of the model that kind of looks like his I guess speedos or his underpants, and you want to just put vertical lines directly on that straight down. And then what we're going to do next is to treat each of the legs like a cylinder as well. So these we treat as individual, think tubes of Pringles almost. And you want to follow it straight down like this, because as a general rule, that kind of looks the best. It looks the most orderly to my mind and gets the point of stripy pants across really well. So this junction between the sort of seat of the pants and where you go into the vertical stripes is where you make that departure and you treat them as two separate things. The legs more like a cylinder, like a tube of Pringles, and the seat of the pants is where you want to focus on sort of going with that kind of half moon kind of shape or semicircle kind of shape. And where you sort of have this crossover up here is where you want to make sure that the lines have continuity to them so that they look ostensibly like the same garment, but the stitching between the legs and the trouser leg and the sort of seat of the pants happens kind of over there, here and here. So we want to respect that. So we need to do the same thing in the front. I'm just finishing off this line on his leg, finish on. And then I want to make sure that I leave enough room and then do the vertical stripes here over where the crotch would be. Just straight down, nice and simple. And another thing that you probably noticed is that I'm going to be, well, I haven't actually explained it yet, but I'm going to be doing it in red and yellow, kind of like McDonald's-y. So generally speaking, what I find useful to do is to do the lighter color first, and if then I end up covering more surface area than I want to, it's really easy to sort of trim it down with the darker color, which would in this case be red. Another thing you want to think about is to look for a way to have both of your colors that you pick kind of shadable using the same wash, because that really helps to tie both colors together to make the garment look more coherent. After all, any stains or any shading or any kind of shadow will be affecting both colors on that model equally. So it makes sense to try to have them both have that same level of shade. Therefore, it really makes life a lot easier if you find one universal shade that can shade both of these colors equally. So for example, if you were going to do off-white and blue, maybe blue stripes or even green stripes, you might want to look at something like, say, Aggaros Earthshade, because that color would be able to shade both the off-white as well as the blue or green pigment equally well. In my case, that's exactly what I'm going to be doing, because I'm going to be doing yellow and red, and the shade that I'm going to be using for this will be, well, it's going to be Devlin Mud, which is the old Aggaros Earthshade, but I find that's going to be perfect for this function. Yeah, so I'm going to put in the red now on this side of the face, and you can sort of see that we are rapidly reaching the point where we have a nice undercoat, or rather nice base coat between these colors, and we can sort of come in and add a little bit more detail to the way the flesh looks, to sort of add a little bit more personality to it, to make it a bit more interesting. Yep, so red onto here, and I've only now sort of realized that there is a bit of a seam on the horns, so it might be interesting to do the horns in a little bit more complicated of a manner instead of just having it halvesies, maybe alternating. I will have to think about that as I block in the rest of the red on this side. So minimally, at least, if I do that horn in red, I'll do that horn in yellow, and then the opposite one in red, we will have that kind of, yeah, let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up the yellow on this horn. Thankfully, like I mentioned before, because we are going lighter color first and then darker color out of the pattern, it's really easy for this to have gone over. Imagine if I had done the red first, I would then need to basically undercoat this in white again, or off-white as the case may be, and basically do that horn in yellow after the white had dried. So that would have added an additional step. So working from light to dark is one way that we can sort of save a little bit of time and give us a little bit of flexibility when we're painting a model that we haven't exactly worked out the color scheme with, and we're just kind of exploring and enjoying ourselves painting it, because this model is a joy to paint. It's not like particularly complex or difficult, but there is a lot of characterful detail, especially on the way the necrotic flesh is rendered. So that should be really good fun to do. Now I'm going to jump over to a little bit of the red to finish off the striped pattern on the pants. And this is where we want to be a little bit more careful, bearing in mind that this color will be a little bit more challenging to paint over if you were using yellow. So you want to make sure that you get the stripes nice and vertical. And as you can see on the palette below, I have already prepared a series of highlights. So this will not be the final finish. I think it would need a little bit more definition and a little bit more shading and highlighting in order to create the sense of shadow playing across the surface of his pants. You know, you want to sort of like make sure that the creases and the volumes of that garment are not lost in the complicated pattern, because there's always a chance that, you know, sometimes when you're painting a pattern across a surface, you're essentially not respecting the geometry of the surface. If you just do a base coat, you need to come in and then reinforce that geometry again using like a system of shades and highlights to make sure that the shadows, stains, and, you know, just darker blotches across the surface kind of respect both colors, both materials. And that really helps us to reinforce the idea that this is one garment but with two different colors playing across the surface, as opposed to two different kind of stripy colors mingling on the surface, which is not correct, right? So yeah, all right, cool. So we are coming in to finish the rest of the red into the yellow, and so far it's been quite a breeze, a lot of fun. As you can see, what I'm trying to do to make my life a little bit easier is to essentially ensure that I focus on creating only one stroke, and that stroke is this north to south, top to bottom kind of motion, and I'm really moving the model to accommodate the application of this stroke, so that I don't need to be, you know, trying to paint diagonal lines, curved lines, or anything of the sort, because that only complicates the painting process and makes it a lot more difficult and finicky to do. I try to make sure I do this so that I can just focus on getting accurate and good with that one vertical continuous top to bottom stroke with my brush, and then I just move the model to accommodate, so that I have an easier time of getting these lines. They don't need to be perfect, because they are folding and warping all over the surface, but to have them relatively consistent so that the final result looks nice and at least semi-orderly. And then into this mix, this basic finish, I will come in to add additional shading and highlighting as the case may be. So I'm just noticing that, you know, some areas I didn't cover with the red because I think my yellow coverage was a little bit wonky. So now I'm just coming in to fill that in with the yellow, Eandon yellow I mean. And then after that we can come in and start doing some fun highlights. So this model I mean, you just by looking at it, you can already tell that it's going to be a blast to paint. You know, it's got some details, but it's not overly heavily detailed. It's got lots of little areas to pick out and enhance, and it's going to be like a ton of fun. So I am now using rattling grime to detail the shaft of his flail. And rattling grime is good for this because it's not jet black. It has a little bit of brown tones in it, which helps to, you know, kind of give it a little bit of visual variation, stops it from turning into a uniformly saturated thing. So this I will apply on the vertical part of the staff, and as for the thresher part, I'm wondering whether I want to do a different color or whether that might give the wrong idea. More than likely I'll keep it the same color and just focus on getting a nice wood grain sort of pattern on the surface. Again, this is a contrast paint, so it's going exactly where I want it to go. I'm just guiding it to where I want it to pool and to gather in order to get the right kind of result. So putting it onto the thresher part of the staff and leaving just the metal caps on the ends for the silver later. Likewise, I will pick up the studs on the frame, on the batten basically of this thresher. And once that is dry, it should be child's play to pick out in silver and then wash down in not Nuln oil because that's a little bit too clean and well maintained, but probably Devlin mud again, or Aggaros shade if you prefer, because that will kind of create that sense of wear and being a little bit dirty and worn out. So I think that will work better. While I'm here, I'm going to pick up this funny little button on the back of his head. I'm not entirely sure what this is. I guess it looks like a button, something like that. And because Rattling Grime is such a versatile color, there is opportunity to come in to add a little bit more shading. The nails in particular, I think I want to darken because he's got really large chunky nails on this hand. On this hand as well, it's quite visible, so it makes sense to pick these out in maybe a bone color later on. And toenails, less obvious but still worthwhile to pick these out, and maybe the space in between, the gaps in between the toes as well. Because this model is sculpted 1:1, and I don't think this is sculpted by a well-known sculptor. At this point, like, these miniatures were produced by Fanatic magazine, which was the holding company for all of the specialist games. I think they outsource a lot of the sculpting out. So the quality of the sculpting is kind of variable, but I think whoever did the models for the Carnival of Chaos did a wonderful job nonetheless. Because even though they are not technically the most brilliant models in the world, I do find that they are sculpted with a lot of personality and character. And really, for a lot of these older models, that's kind of all you're really hoping for, that whoever sculpted these put a lot of care and attention and a bit of pride into getting them to be as characterful and interesting as you want them to be. So yeah, wonderful models. Model, I guess. Okay, cool. So we have done most of the colors. We are just left with silver. So let's quickly drop that onto the end cap so that we can shade this and move on. Today is one of those days where, unfortunately, the bulk of the day, there was construction going on around my neighborhood. And unfortunately, what that means is that the whole day I was unable to record anything. And now, only now, late in the day, am I finding the opportunity to put together this video for you. So nonetheless, not an issue, kind of my problem to deal with, my cross to bear as it were. So I'm gonna just jump in and get on with it. Could whinge all day about how, sometimes not all the conditions are perfect for recording. But then again, when are conditions ever perfect for recording? Instead, I'll just get on with it and yeah, keep going. Cool, I'm actually really liking the way he looks now. There is a lot of blotchiness to get rid of, but that's kind of fine. So I'm going to grab some of this Phalanx Yellow. And Phalanx Yellow is just this really lovely, vibrant, very intense yellow that covers beautifully as well. I'm not sure how Citadel does this sometimes, but they manage to produce colors like this that not only combine the vibrancy and punchiness of the best models, the best colors that you can find in the range, but they also coat beautifully. And yeah, you can already see what effect it's having here as I apply highlights onto each of these lines on his pants. Remember that, yeah, ultimately this material is fabric and is designed to contour over the form of the model beneath. So as you apply these highlights, you are really trying to reinforce the geometry of the figure wearing the clothing, and whatever you apply to sort of accentuate any wrinkles or folds in the fabric are more superficial. The tighter the clothing, the more important it is to reinforce the geometry of the figure below. If the model is swathed in loose or ill-fitting clothing, then really you should be paying more attention to emphasizing the fabric wrinkles and so on. But a well sculpted model, this is usually very evident, as is in this case. This model clearly is wearing some fairly tight clothing because he is a big boy, and as a result, it's really easy to see where the highlights are supposed to go. Yeah, so he's looking great so far. More highlights over here. We ignore that sort of big crease under his butt. That's just fine as is. And then we highlight onto the edge here. Maybe trim this line a little bit. I hope you can see everything that I'm doing. And then maybe we'll put a little bit more of a yellow line at the top, where I would assume there might be some kind of an elastic waistband. Unfortunately, he doesn't appear to have a drawstring or even a section of rope to keep up his pants. So goodness knows that's being held on by just how sticky he is, because he is a stinky Nurgle boy after all. And that's just one of those thoughts that will keep you warm at night. Eee. Not a great thought, but yeah. Cool. So my brush is getting a little bit dry, which is often the case when I've been highlighting a spot with the same color for a while, and the paint is beginning to get crispy on my brush. Nevertheless, I think I can get away with the rest of this application. And it's kind of nice to just sort of rotate the model and go around on one side and then onto the other side, and then just continue until you have a look that you're happy with overall. There we go. So I think he's looking pretty good. Yellow wise, now I need to do the same for his headdress, both on the left and the right side. But before that, yeah, washing that out was really good, really helpful. And now we're gonna detail the wrinkles on his mask and his rather ominous sort of face sack. There's something really cadaverous about this miniature, and I think that's a big part of why this model looks as interesting as it does. And he's really, really fun to paint because the sculptor has had the opportunity to just focus on big shapes, big poses and gestures, and not gotten too bogged down in specific details. All of the effort has really gone to making the skin look as cadaverous and disgusting as possible, and that is only been to the strength of the miniature. It only looks more and more disgusting and horrible as a result, which is what you want, really. Cool. So a little bit more detail on the top of his sackcloth hood. It's hard to call it sackcloth because it's so colorful, right? I mean, I'm sure this hood that he's got on must have cost a fortune to get dyed in such a vibrant color. Either that or it was ripped from some banner somewhere, maybe some repurposed piece of clothing, maybe the remains of some rich merchants, embroidered silks. But it kind of looks really nice and vibrant and really fun to paint. Cool, that will do. I think for now, we might come back to the yellow to boost it up a little bit more. But for now, we're going to jump over to the red side of things. And I think because I generally want the red to look fairly dark and fairly deep, saturated, I think I'm just going to apply some highlights over onto the edges to make them look a bit more tattered and worn, as well as wherever the material swells from the giant quads of this muscular warrior, and kind of where his butt would fill out the material over there a little bit more. And then really the next thing I want to do is to come in and to sort of shade this equally, both the yellow and the red areas, with a bit of that Devlin mud I've been talking about so much. And that hopefully will kind of unify the colors a little bit, sort of really give it that air of being kind of existing in the same universe, because the same shadows and effects are affecting both materials equally. I think I dropped a bit of dark paint into his eye, so I'll need to fix that shortly. It's not the end of the world. Mistakes happen. Yeah, oops. Sorry, bud. Hope you can see now. Okay, so I think that's coming along quite nicely. I will want to take some ice yellow to highlight that yellow to the next stage, but really we are not covering much of it this time, just kind of um, adding a little bit of a draw for the eye at certain key parts of the model to make it look a little bit more faded. I debated using kind of like a bone color for this stage because that would help to make the model look a bit more worn. But because the lore for this faction goes on to great lengths about how colorful they are, how gaudily covered in silks and so on. I think maybe what I'll do is I'll just keep things bright for now. And if it doesn't work on the final model, what I'll do is I'll come back in and I'll darken them with a little bit more the original contrast. But for now, I think it's looking pretty good as is. Don't see myself needing to do this anytime soon. Of course, your mileage may vary. If you decide that you want to sort of altogether more morose and a little bit more scary kind of look for your Nurgle followers, I think you would be, well encouraged to try to spend a little bit more time darkening this further. But I think for me personally, I think that the brightness of it is a bit of a draw. So a little bit of orange where the red used to be. Of course, we don't cover the entirety of the previous highlight, but we just add intensity to it with a smaller point. And if we keep the points small and targeted where they should be, and not have too big of a jump in terms of color gradient, I think this should blend together quite nicely and create quite a nice naturalistic effect. Underside of the eye is always a good place to emphasize when painting models that don't actually have visible eyes. So that kind of natural dip in the material underneath the eye is an area that you want to focus on. So this brush, as you can see, is rapidly getting past its best. So I think I will switch to a new brush for us to start working on the Plague Bearer Flesh skin tone. So right now the model is in danger of becoming extremely I guess yellow, very warm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tone down the flesh tone a little bit by mixing in some of the original Vallejo Silver Grey. That's the analog I use for touching up my undercoat, which is grey-white from Pylox, which I understand is used primarily for like spraying cars and so on, but happens to be absolutely perfect for miniatures as well. So yeah, adding this in helps us to desaturate the colors a little bit, make them a little bit more believable, and we can build towards a more interesting finish this way. Cool. So we want to make sure that we don't cover all of the previous good work done by the Plague Bearer Flesh. We want to just focus on areas that we want to emphasize. Else we would have used a different contrast paint to begin with. It really doesn't make sense to cover a model with contrast paint and then cover all of it up again with highlights. You might as well have used a different contrast paint or glaze color to begin with. Contrast paint being a brand, of course. So working on his fingers, we're adding a little bit more definition and cleaning up some of just the usual gravity stains caused by the contrast paint, and making sure that we address the volumes such as they are on the miniature. And later on, after this, I think the next step would be to come in to add a little bit of bruising to where it's appropriate. So with a model like this where it's covered with a lot of lesions and scars and just general damage to the skin, I think it makes a lot of sense to come in to add a bit of the bruising. using Magos purple, which would sort of create that redness and that kind of it's kind of like infected look to the miniature. Now we need to go with a little bit more grey white and a little bit more Plague Bearer Flesh, I believe, and that works a lot better with than Plague Bearer Flesh on its own, which can be extremely yellow. It's fine if that's what you're going for. If the model was, for example, primarily blue or purple, it would make sense to keep the yellow in the model, because then you get a nice contrast between warm and cold. Generally speaking, when you combine warm and cold spots on a miniature, your eye gets drawn to the warm areas. So it's a good idea to keep the warm areas where you want your eye to be drawn to, whereas the cooler areas tend to recede. Of course, this changes with the vibrancy of the tone that you pick. So if you're going to choose an incredibly bright and vibrant and intense cool color, that can become the draw to your eye instead of the warm areas. But generally speaking, warm areas draw the eye more, cool areas recede a little bit, especially if they are desaturated. Yeah, so just bear that in mind when you're planning your color schemes, and you won't go far wrong. I mean, when you think about it, there's no real wrong way, or there's no real wrong color to painting this model, and you can sort of prove this, by choosing colors at random, and then we can build a color scheme around it just by making intelligent choices for colors to offset this. So, for example, if you've decided that your Carnival of Chaos is like everybody's going to be wearing teal, right, which is a fairly un-Nurgle color because it's very clean. It suggests sophistication. It suggests like high tech and that kind of thing. Or else it suggests cold or magical power. Most of these concepts don't really work with the idea of disease and decay, but with a bit of excuse me, with a bit of care, you can kind of construct a color scheme around it by pairing it with the right colors. So for teal, for example, I would definitely pair it with excuse me, some kind of a dingy kind of neutral gray tone, brown tone, and that adds the warmth to counterbalance the brightness and the cleanness. And I think if you lean to sort of more of a patina kind of look, blotchy and damaged, I think verdigris is a really good reference for the kind of way that teal can be made to look dirty and worn. That can really create an interesting effect. So there's kind of no wrong color to start with. And in my opinion, the best game or the best miniatures to train this sense for color and for applying them regardless of theme is Blood Bowl. Because in Blood Bowl, you paint football strip, right? Sports team uniforms are usually just really quite lurid and bright, and making them work with almost any kind of theme is something that Blood Bowl players deal with every single day. And one of the real reasons why Blood Bowl miniatures are such a joy to paint is because we, as Blood Bowl players, we're continually pushing the kind of colors that you will be using. So one day you might be doing a Khorne army that's entirely going to be in blue because that's just the nature of their uniform and strip. Or you might be doing orcs wearing purple, for example, and purple and green becomes that really interesting contrast that makes the models really pop and stand out on the battlefield, or the pitch, as it were. So yeah, Blood Bowl, just really good practice for messing around with colors and learning to work around the restrictions, I suppose, or the limitations of having to use uncharacteristic colors. And a really good way to stop people from, well, not stop, but to encourage people to not paint everything in colors that they have grown accustomed to. So do Marines always have to be blue? Can they be different colors? Can they have very different variations? Could you do brightly colored Chaos Warriors, for example? I believe you could. Brightly colored Chaos Warriors for Zinj look absolutely stunning. Or for Slanesh, just using uncharacteristic colors is a really good way to sort of expand your potential as a painter, as well as your ability to work with contrast. Because when you use colors that are not a crutch, suddenly you're forced to make sure that the geometry as well as the detail of the surface work thematically to convey the idea that you're trying to do. So case in point, for Kingdom Death, for example, I painted the Hangman's tree, which is a giant, really, really gnarled tree. I did that in blue instead of your usual browns because I just thought that that makes it look really blighted and really unhealthy, kind of diseased. So I did it in a sort of teal blue color for the tree trunks, and I thought that looked visually very, very interesting. It's doable. It's just you need to make sure that that other cues indicate what you're trying to show. So, for example, I spent a lot of time making sure the wood grain was just right. For example, because people aren't used to seeing wood grain in blue, in my opinion. Therefore, we need to be extra careful to make sure that it conveys the right idea. Cool. I am going to jump in and slap on some Devlin mud onto the metal. And as you can see, it gives you this really nice warm rust color. It's kind of old and dingy and dirty as opposed to straight up bright orange rusty. And you can sort of see that I'm also using it to apply onto other surfaces, so that helps to blend the different surfaces together. The different materials together, I mean. Yeah, a little bit on that funny button on the back of his head. And now we're going to jump in. Now's the fun part. We're going to jump in with a bit of Magos Purple to add kind of the damage to the model. Skin, of course, is translucent. And so as a result, that translucency can be expressed by applying colors that more deliberately reference the look of blood beneath the surface. So in this case, we are putting Magos Purple because we are suggesting that there is bruising under the surface. And by concentrating on the lesions first, and then working a bit of this color into the recesses, it suggests that where there is tension in the skin and it's being pulled apart, you get to see a little bit of the underlying blood beneath, and that really sort of works with our understanding of how skin stretches to accommodate the movement of the body. And necrotic skin is just a little bit less elastic, a little bit less good at holding together. Therefore, it starts to reveal the blood in the recesses. Kind of disgusting, but yeah, really, if you really wanted to start, becoming really good at observing the physics of form in real life, there's no better way to start than to do it for miniature painting, because it makes you observe things really, really closely in order to try to replicate them in miniature form. So he's got this funny textured surface underneath his back. It looks to me like there is a maggot under the surface. So with that in mind, I'm probably going to first of all add a bit of bruising over the top, and then I want to come in and suggest the translucency of the skin by putting a little bit of Gryphcharger grey over it. And that really conveys the idea that there's an animal or there's a living creature traveling under the skin. Yuck. But also yum if you're Nurgle. You're really into these things. Yeah. Ew. Brother. No, brother. No, brother. I'm sorry. I am mentally 10 years old. Yeah. That meme is... unbelievable, the fact that a grown man can say stuff like that. Pretty awesome. Anyway, yeah, so you can sort of see that, I'm judiciously keeping green in some areas, making sure that I'm not completely wiping out the green, because I kind of want the interplay between the green and the purple in order to get that look of being bruised and stretched and damaged, while still respecting the skin, SKEIN, of the material. By material, I mean the flesh, and that kind of gets the point across. So I really enjoyed this step with where you shade one color with something that should not make sense, because the colors in a completely different spectrum. That interplay of colors makes it really satisfying to do, in my opinion. And it's a really good way of teaching us to be more observant of our surroundings, just as far as its ability to improve our ability to render disgusting Nurgle creatures. So there, a little bit under the ankle, not too much for the legs, because the skin on the legs tends to be quite a bit thicker, so none on the calves, because calf skin is thick, but definitely on the flat of his foot, where the bones on the back of his foot would be, because that's a part of the body that would stretch more readily, and therefore you would be able to see through it. Cool. So this stage you can go on and on, but you got to be careful to not overdo, because you rapidly reach the point where you might put on a little bit too much Magos purple, and then the model just starts to look not that it looks less damaged or anything like that. It's just that it can suddenly cross a line where it starts to become a bit too rosy, and that might not convey what you're trying to get across as well. So just be wary of that crossover point. If you've never painted anything like this, I strongly recommend you give it a shot. It's incredibly entertaining, and you get quite a nice result. Cool. So now we go back to our highlight to re-establish the absolute pinnacles. We've gone to apply paint onto where, like I mentioned, the bruising and the stretching of skin would reveal where the blood is. Now we go back to almost pure silver gray, and we apply this to areas where the blood is very deep under the surface, and you're basically seeing baggy mounds of skin, build up of skin. So the opposite of what we were trying to do previously. We're defining now the areas where skin has kind of piled up in a way as to become opaque and disguise the appearance of the blood underneath the surface. So wherever, like the skin has kind of heated up a little bit, sometimes if you want to make it look really disgusting, you can do what I did there and just apply a series of bumps. The nice thing about using a sort of very pale gray alongside this color of green for the skin with purple in the recesses is that it all starts to look very, very polychromatic in a good way. So it starts to look like visually there's a lot going on. And to be fair, by this stage, there is a lot going on the surface, and that kind of is the look that we're trying to achieve. It's a complex look, right? The idea of Nurgle or sort of disease skin, pox-ridden skin, has a lot of colors at play under the surface, and you could glaze it ad nauseum, literally ad nauseum. But yeah, It's a lot of fun to do. So if you've never had a chance to paint something like this, definitely recommend you give it a shot. It is its own weird thing, I feel, and oddly satisfying to do. Cool. So now we're going to go in with a bit of ice yellow because there are some postulated bits that I want to emphasize. So like just there, and you can sort of see that the yellow adds a different kind of personality to it. Kind of disgusting. So just a little bit of ice yellow to quite literally bring matters to a head, which is gross. And yeah, very soon this begins to look like something that you really don't want to touch ever, because you brother. Also, I think we can come in and do the nails in this off yellow tone because it keeps it within the same spectrum anyway. There we go. And more little dots to represent sort of little abscesses and gatherings of pus below the skin surface. Eee. And the more of this you add, the more disgusting it gets. So lastly, well, not lastly, but next we want to do, like I mentioned, this weird shape beneath the skin. I've got some Gryphcharger Grey, and we're going to just apply this around to give the sense that there is something foreign underneath the surface of the skin, like that. And then just give it a casual wipe with your finger to re-establish the high points. And now he's really got the look of having something underneath the skin. Yuck. Now, I need to emphasize a little bit more of the wood grain on the weapon because it's kind of gotten a bit lost. So this is just rattling grime mixed with a little bit of our pale grey mix from the Undercoat. And you don't have to do a lot of this, I feel. You just need to kind of add a little bit of this. Try adding a bit of ice yellow in because I need to go a bit lighter. Yeah, there we go. So just making sure that there's a little bit more to draw the eye. And yeah. So I did throw some shade at just the idea that these miniatures were not sculpted by anyone that I'm aware of. Therefore, it isn't sculpted by one of the bigger names, I imagine. Unless I'm completely mistaken, which might be the case. Correct me if I've got this wrong somehow in the comments. But yeah, despite this, the sculptor has done an extremely good job. This model is a dream to paint and really fun to do. So kudos to whoever did this. I will find it, and maybe at some point I'll drop it into the comments. Or if you know the answer to this, please go right ahead and comment. Set me straight on this because these models are worthy of praise because they are wonderfully done. Absolutely wonderfully done. Okay, so we are looking good in my opinion. Now I want to come in and add a bit of shading for the pants, just reinforce with a little bit of Devlin Mud, aka Aggaros Earthshade. And this highlight, or rather this shading, really would cut across all areas of the model, because this represents, what we're representing here is the play of shadow across the surface, and therefore something like this would influence all parts of the model equally, whether it's the red parts of the pants or the yellow parts. You can sort of think of this as, like when you ink a comic book drawing, you use black whether or not the color beneath it really needs black shading or not. Black is just the color that's used to emphasize the lines, and in that sense this is not that much different. Okay, so I think we are getting to a really good place. The last thing I would like to do is to come back in with the red, mix a little bit of black into it, or even Rattling Grime is fine, to get a really deep red. And now I just want to add a little bit of trickle, going down some of the larger wounds and lesions, because you would expect these areas to still be kind of raw and disgusting. And the idea is you want to create these tiny little rivulets of gore in key areas. You don't need a lot of it. To cut across large areas of skin. Just to make him a little bit more visually interesting. Add this under his hood. To suggest more unspeakable things going on beneath. And to really emphasize that he is covered in wounds that in real life would either have been bleeding or are still bleeding. You want to emphasize that at least there is a bit of staining going on. And the idea is not to go overboard with this, but to just give it a little bit of extra punch. So last little bits of cleanup. And I think we are very nearly done. Perfect. Cool. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed me painting this Carnival of Chaos gent. And I'll see you in the next one. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed watching this. And have a good one. Cheers.